My name is Walter Hamlin. I'm 81 years old, a veteran, a widower, and a man who used to matter in this world. Once upon a time, people stood when I walked into a room. Now, I use a cane to move from the kitchen to the front door, and nobody even lifts their eyes. They don't see a man anymore. They see the cane first. They see the age, the slowness, the irrelevance. I live alone in a modest brick house on the outskirts of Temple, Texas. I've lived here for over 40 years, ever since my return from Vietnam. This place has seen my youth, my marriage, my children's births, my wife's death, and now it quietly absorbs the silence of my days. The lawn out front is mostly brown in the summer and patchy in the winter, but I keep it trimmed out of habit. I still mow it myself, slowly. I won't let anyone take that from me. After I fractured my hip last year, my doctor told me I'd never move the same way again. I accepted that. What I didn't accept was the pity, the sideways glances, the assumption that I was now something to be managed like a cracked pipe or a broken fence post. The cane became part of my body, an extension of my will. I chose it carefully, not one of those aluminum things from Walmart. Mine is oak, carved with the same care I once put into my old rifles. I sanded and lacquered it myself. The handle is smooth, molded to my grip. There's a knot near the base that reminds me of the scar on my shoulder, earned in 1968 during a firefight. None of the young men in my life have ever asked about. I have 2 sons, Rick and Jeremy. One's a dentist, the other works in logistics, whatever that means. They're both busy, always on a call, always running behind. They live about 40 minutes away, and between them, they visited me maybe 3 times this year. I don't blame them, not entirely. They have wives, kids, mortgages. They say all the right things. We love you, Dad. You're our rock, Dad. We're just so busy, Dad. But their love is like the morning mist, there for a moment, then gone before it reaches the ground. The truth is, they've already moved on. I am not part of their everyday. I'm the once-a-month phone call, the obligatory Thanksgiving dinner, the birthday card signed, "Love from all of us." My grandsons, Tyler 17 and Max 14, barely know me. When they were little, I tried. I read them stories, took them fishing, told them tales about Vietnam that were softened for their ears. But over time, their eyes began to glaze over, their thumbs twitching for a screen. Now, when I see them, which is rare, they nod politely, like I'm a neighbor they barely recognize. They don't ask me questions. They don't hug me. Sometimes I wonder if they'll even remember my name once I'm gone. My wife Dorothy passed away 6 years ago. Stroke, quick and cruel. We had been married 55 years. She was the only person who ever truly listened to me. Not the kind of listening that waits for its turn to speak, but real listening, the kind where you feel seen. Since her death, I've spoken aloud less and less. The silence in the house is thick, like fog you can't quite drive through. I speak to her photograph every night. I tell her how the lawn looks, what I ate, what I didn't eat, what the doctor said, what the TV said. She never answers, but I know she hears me. Sometimes I leave the radio on just to trick the silence into backing off a bit. I miss her in ways I didn't think were possible for a man my age. I miss her perfume, her nagging, the sound of her teeth clicking against her coffee cup. Every morning is the same. I wake up before the sun, out of habit more than necessity. I boil water for my coffee, 3 tablespoons of ground beans, a pinch of salt, just the way Dorothy made it. It doesn't taste the same. Nothing does. I sit by the window and watch the street. The same people walk their dogs. The same garbage truck lumbers by. The world continues its routine with no regard for the fact that I'm no longer a part of it. I watch them all. The young mother jogging with a stroller, the neighbor boy with a skateboard, the mailman who never looks up from his route. I used to wave, now I don't bother. My life used to have structure, morning PT, drills, deployments, monthly reports, inspections. After the Army, I worked in a hardware store, then managed it, then bought a share in it. I liked working with my hands. Tools don't lie. Screws don't gossip. Wood doesn't cheat you. People do. Now the store is gone, turned into a vape shop. I pass by sometimes and see teenagers standing outside, clouding the air with fruit-flavored smoke. I wonder if they know what discipline is, what sacrifice is. I wonder if they ever will. Sometimes I go out just to prove I still can. The supermarket, the pharmacy, the barber shop, places that used to be errands have become battlegrounds. I park as far as I can and walk the distance, cane in hand, each step deliberate. People offer to help me carry things. Some days I say yes, most days I don't. I'm not angry at them. I'm angry at what I've become in their eyes, a fragile man, a liability. My mind is as sharp as ever, my body betrays me, but my thoughts are intact. I remember every face I saw in war. I remember the feel of rain on my helmet, the whistle of incoming mortar, the taste of the instant coffee in a foxhole. Last winter, I slipped on my porch and lay there for almost an hour. It wasn't the pain that got to me. It was the look on the paramedic's face. Pity, again. Like I was just another old man whose time was running out. Rick showed up at the hospital, nodded through the paperwork, and spent the whole time texting. He said, "You need to think about assisted living, Dad." I told him I'd rather die in my own kitchen than live in a place where people wipe your mouth like you're a child. He laughed. He thought I was joking. I wasn't. Lately, they've been circling. Rick and Jeremy, calling more, offering to stop by, asking if I've thought about the future. They use coded phrases, safety, accessibility, retirement options. I know what they're really asking. They want the house. Or maybe they just want me somewhere they can check off like a chore list, somewhere out of the way. I've seen it before. Old friends of mine moved into communities that look like hotels and smell like bleach. Places where people forget your name the moment you sign the papers. But I'm not going anywhere. This house is mine. The walls remember my footsteps. The windows hold my wife's laughter. The floors know the rhythm of my mornings. And the cane? That stays with me, too. It is not just for walking. It is a reminder of who I was, of who I am still trying to be. They think I'm weak now. They think I don't see the condescension in their voices, the way they trade looks when I say something with conviction. They think time has worn me down into a man who won't fight back. But they're wrong. I've fought worse. I've buried friends. I've come home to silence and built a life from it. I've endured loss, loneliness, and now the slow erosion of identity that comes with growing old in a world that has no patience for age. I am not finished. I may be quiet, but I am not passive. I may walk with a cane, but I do not lean on others. The cane is not a crutch. It is a weapon, if need be, and soon they will understand just how steady my hand still is. They threw my cane in the trash not knowing what they were discarding. But I picked it back up, and I will use it to knock them quietly, decisively out of my life. It began with what seemed like concern. A late May afternoon, warm but not yet stifling, and Rick called me out of the blue. Not a text, not a voice message, but a real phone call. His voice in real time asking how I was. That alone should have tipped me off. He never called without a reason. Jeremy was on the line, too, joined in via some conference feature I never cared to learn. Their voices were syrupy sweet, the kind of soft-edged tones people use when delivering news to a toddler or a dying pet. They asked how I was feeling, how my leg was healing, whether I was lonely. It was all framed in the guise of family concern, but something in me knew better. You get a nose for motives after 81 years. Eventually, after enough sugar-coating to rot a saint's teeth, Rick got to the point. "We were thinking, Dad," he said, "maybe it's time you stayed with one of us for a while, just until you're fully back on your feet." Jeremy chimed in before I could answer. "It's not that we don't trust you alone, it's just, well, after last winter we worry. What if something happens and you can't get to the phone? What if it's worse than a slip next time?" I told them I appreciated the concern, but that I was managing fine. I wasn't reckless. I had systems in place, neighbors who checked in, a phone within reach in every room. But they pressed on, and as I listened, I began to realize this wasn't a request. It was a decision already made. They said it would be temporary, that I could stay in Rick's spare room, just a couple weeks, and they'd make it comfortable. I should have known that when people say comfortable, they usually mean convenient for themselves. I agreed reluctantly, because sometimes it's easier to let the wind blow through than try to shut the door on a storm. The next day, Rick and Jeremy came together to help me pack a few things. They were unusually efficient, rushing me, wrapping things I hadn't even agreed to take. They packed my shaving kit, some clothes, medications, and a few books I hadn't touched in years. They left behind my favorite sweater, the radio I used for background noise, and my coffee grinder. But worst of all, they tried to leave the cane. "You won't need this," Rick said, holding it like it was a dead branch. "We'll get you something safer, maybe one of those aluminum walkers with wheels and a seat." I told him absolutely not. That cane was mine. I'd made it. I'd bled into the wood, sanded it with my own hands. It fit my grip better than a handshake. But he laughed and shrugged, and I watched him carry it out to the car. I assumed he put it in the trunk. I should have known better. The drive to Rick's house was long and quiet. They didn't talk much. Just the occasional remark about traffic or gas prices. I sat in the back seat, clutching a duffel bag, my hips stiff, my jaw tighter with every passing mile. Their house was big, almost vulgar in its design. Stucco walls, a 3-car garage, trimmed hedges that looked like they cost more to maintain than my entire yard. Inside, everything was sterile. White counters, chrome fixtures, a living room that looked more like a waiting room. No pictures on the walls, no warmth. Just curated perfection. They led me to the back room. "Your space," Rick said, smiling. It had no windows. The bed was low, with a memory foam mattress that smelled like plastic. There was a narrow dresser and a cheap chair in the corner, the kind that wobbles slightly when you sit on it. "We thought this would be better than the guest room upstairs," Jeremy added. "You know, fewer stairs, easier access to the bathroom." I nodded. Though inside I felt like a suitcase being tucked into a storage closet. I asked where my cane was. Rick exchanged a quick look with Jeremy. "Oh, you didn't bring it in?" he said. "I thought it was still in the trunk." I hobbled to the garage that evening to check. It wasn't there. I searched the car, the back seat, the trunk, the garage shelves. Nothing. I found an empty trash bin and a broken handle leaning against the wall. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. The remains of my cane snapped at the neck, splintered, tossed like refuse. I stood there a long time, staring at it. My cane, my creation, my companion. Discarded like an old receipt, I didn't ask them about it. What was the point? The answer would have been the same mixture of evasion and gaslighting I'd been hearing for months. It was damaged. You probably forgot to bring it. We're just trying to help. Lies wrapped in parental tones. But something shifted in me that evening. A quiet click like a rifle, chambering around. The next morning they gave me a walker, lightweight, collapsible, made of cold metal and rubber tips. It had a sticker on the side that said Easy Mobility. It squeaked when it moved. Every time I touched it, it felt like an insult. I asked again about my cane. Jeremy gave a pained expression and said, "Dad, that whole thing wasn't safe. It was just a piece of wood. This is medical grade," as if I'd asked for a diagnosis, as if dignity could be upgraded to aluminum. I didn't argue, not then. I took the walker and used it, just enough to lull them into believing I was accepting my new reality. The days passed in a fog of forced routine, breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Rick's wife, Sandra, would bring me food like she was feeding a pet, on a tray, without conversation. She never sat with me, never asked questions, just in and out like a server at a diner. The meals were tasteless, low sodium, low fat, high in salt. Oatmeal without sugar, chicken without seasoning. Every plate was a reminder that I no longer had the right to choose. My prescriptions were kept in a locked cabinet. I had to ask permission to take my own medication. One evening I mentioned that I hadn't seen the label on a new bottle. Rick said it was handled. I said nothing, but I started counting pills. Worse than the meals, worse than the prison-like routine, was the tone. The voice Rick used when speaking to me, slow, exaggerated, like I was some child just learning English. "Are we feeling okay today?" he'd ask, with the smile of someone barely restraining a sigh. Jeremy was no better. His sons, my grandsons, called me the old man behind my back, except they weren't very good at being discreet. "Is he going to croak before the playoffs?" I heard one of them say through the door. The other laughed. I wanted to yell, but I didn't. I held my breath and memorized their words. Then came the meeting. They said they wanted to go over a few things: papers, finances, health directives. Rick printed out a folder, placed it in front of me like a contract killer delivering terms. "Just so we're prepared, Dad," he said. "It's for your benefit." The documents were full of medical jargon, power of attorney phrases, long paragraphs about guardianship. I skimmed and saw words like mental competency assessment and property transfer authorization. I asked if they were planning to sell my house. Jeremy smiled. "It's sitting empty, Dad. That's not safe. What if someone breaks in? And let's be honest, you're not going back there." That sentence sank into me like a cold knife. You're not going back. My life. Dismissed in a breath. I didn't sign the papers. I told them I'd think about it. That night I went to bed with the door locked. I lay in the dark, listening to the murmur of their voices down the hallway, too muffled to understand, but the tone, unmistakable. Calculation. Strategy. My own sons, plotting something that went beyond concern. It wasn't about safety, it was about control. And the cane they'd thrown away? That was the first move. They didn't just want to support me, they wanted to replace me. Reduce me to a name on a medical chart, a signature on a check, an obligation managed in Excel. But they underestimated something. I had lost many things in my life. Brothers in war, a wife to illness, friends to time. But I hadn't lost myself. Not yet. And if they thought they could erase me quietly, gently, under the pretense of care, they were mistaken. I would not be erased. I would not go softly. They threw my cane in the trash. But I remembered where the spare oak rod was, the one I carved but never finished, still resting in my old duffel bag, the one they packed in haste. It wasn't polished, but it was solid. And tomorrow I would begin, quietly, without drama. A plan was forming, a steady, deliberate response, not rage, not confrontation, something sharper, because they took my cane as if it were just wood. They forgot what kind of hands held it. They forgot what those hands had survived. But I remembered, and I would make them remember too. The day the dynamics shifted for good didn't come with any shouting. There was no dramatic outburst, no slammed doors, no one moment where everything snapped. It was more like a long-held thread finally pulled too tight, the tension quiet but constant, until it started to cut into the skin. It happened gradually, as such things often do, almost imperceptibly at first, until even I couldn't deny that I wasn't a guest in Rick's home. I was an obstacle, something in the way, something to be tolerated, managed, and ultimately phased out. It began with the schedule. At first they told me I could settle in, get my bearings, recover. But within days my world shrank into an absurdly rigid routine. Breakfast was served at exactly 7:45 a.m. Whether I was hungry or not didn't matter. I had to be at the kitchen table by then, seated, dressed, and ready. If I was late, even by a few minutes, Sandra would come knocking, her voice full of that tight, rehearsed cheerfulness reserved for kindergarten teachers and memory care nurses. "Time to come eat, Walter." Her voice would ring through the hallway as if I were hard of hearing or slow to understand. Sometimes she didn't even wait for me to respond. She would just barge in, her knock symbolic at best, and draw open the blinds as if commanding the light to enter and wipe away whatever private moment I'd been clinging to. The meals became humiliations in their own right. It wasn't just the food, bland, overcooked, and stripped of anything resembling flavor or dignity. It was the way they served it. Small portions cut into bite-sized pieces, set on the plate like I couldn't use a knife anymore. One morning I found a sippy cup next to my coffee mug. Sandra laughed when I pointed it out, saying it had been a joke from one of the kids, but the mug disappeared the next day, replaced by a heavy plastic cup with a no-spill lid. She said it was just in case. In case of what, I never asked. The implication was clear. They began keeping the bathroom door locked. When I asked about it, Jeremy explained that one of the grandsons had started locking it at night for security reasons. I wasn't sure what kind of security a bathroom needed, but I stopped asking after a while. I'd learned by then that asking only made them look at each other with those eyes, the kind that say, "See, he's confused again," even when I was being perfectly reasonable. They started replacing my words with looks, shrugs, side glances, silence. It was worse than arguments. Arguments meant someone still believed you were worth engaging with. What they gave me was dismissal. The house grew colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. Jeremy's sons barely spoke to me. When they did, it was with forced politeness or thinly veiled mockery. "Hey, Gramps, you remember the Wi-Fi password?" Tyler asked once, smirking. I said I didn't. "Didn't think so," he muttered, laughing to himself as he walked away. Max once filmed me trying to get up from the couch, then showed the video to his brother like it was slapstick comedy. I saw it reflected in the dark glass of the TV screen, me struggling to stand, my hands shaking slightly, my breath shallow. They giggled like I was a clown. When I told Rick what had happened, he shrugged. "They're just kids," he said. "Don't be so sensitive." I looked at him and realized he meant it. To him, my pain wasn't valid. My sense of offense was simply further proof of my decline. Everything I felt, everything I said, could now be framed as a symptom, not of injustice, not of real, tangible disrespect, but of old age. It got worse. One night, I woke up to voices in the hallway. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. "He's not going to live forever," Jeremy was saying. "And you?" Saw the account balance. "If we wait too long, the house will just sit there empty, losing value." Rick's voice was lower, harder to hear, but I caught fragments. "Guardianship route. We just need one evaluation. Don't tell him until it's done." I lay in bed, heart pounding, the darkness suddenly pressing against my chest like a weight. They were planning something, not just pushing me into assisted living, not just managing my days. They wanted control, legal, financial control, the kind that comes with papers and stamps and signatures I wouldn't be allowed to give. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every small insult, every condescending word, every decision made without me, and I saw it all clearly now. The broken cane hadn't been an accident. It was a message. You're not in charge anymore. This is our show now. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt something settle in my bones, something ancient and deliberate, the kind of resolve that carried me through jungles and firefights and hospital beds. I didn't survive all that to end up a silent prisoner in my son's house, watching my legacy get signed away behind my back. The next morning I asked about the conversation. "I heard you last night," I said. Rick paused, his fork midway to his mouth. "You must have dreamt it, Dad." Jeremy didn't even look up from his phone. "Probably the TV, you know how the sound carries." I stared at them both, not blinking. They went back to their breakfast like I hadn't spoken at all. That day, I checked the hall closet when no one was around. My suitcase, my good one, the one with the hidden compartments, had been rifled through. My documents were gone, my birth certificate, my military records, my discharge papers, even my driver's license. Only the expired insurance card was left. My wallet still had some cash, maybe $80, but my bank card was missing. I'd kept it tucked in the side pocket of the bag, away from my everyday wallet. Only I knew about it. Or so I thought. I checked my prescriptions. One bottle was missing. The one I took for anxiety, only occasionally. It wasn't a daily med, so no one would notice it gone unless they were counting. And they were counting everything now. That evening, I sat with Sandra in the living room while Rick and Jeremy were handling some paperwork in Rick's office. I asked her where they kept the spare keys to my house. "Why do you ask?" she said, not unkindly, but with that tone again, the one that says, "Be careful, old man. You're walking a fine line." I told her I was just wondering. I liked to know where things were. She said she didn't know. She lied. I could tell. Her eyes darted. Her hands fidgeted. She knew. They all knew. Later that night, I retrieved the unfinished oak rod from the duffel bag in the back of my closet. It was dusty, rough in places, but sturdy. I sat on the edge of the bed and began to sand it with the inside of a matchbox, slowly, methodically, as the house settled into sleep around me. Every stroke was a memory. Every edge smoothed was a thought organized, a plan taking shape. I wasn't ready to act yet, not quite. But soon, very soon, they thought they had all the power. They thought they could edit me out of my own story. But I still had strength in my hands, sharpness in my mind, and, most importantly, something they'd long since discarded: patience. The kind of patience that waits in silence, watches closely, and strikes only when the time is right. They had drawn first blood. The war had begun. The turning point came in the form of a seemingly innocent trip to the doctor. Rick announced it over dinner as if he were reading off the week's grocery list. "We've scheduled you an appointment, Dad. Just a routine checkup. Medicare covers it." I asked why it was necessary when I'd just seen my own doctor 2 months ago. "This one's with a specialist," Jeremy added quickly. "It's just smart to have a second opinion, a geriatrician. They're better equipped to assess long-term health stuff." I knew then it wasn't a checkup, it was an evaluation, the kind used in court filings, the kind that ends with someone else making your decisions for you. I didn't protest, not then. I nodded, chewed my dry chicken breast, and made a note in my mind. Every move they made was careful now, calculated, but they were moving fast. That meant they were nervous. Good. The clinic was in a building that smelled like bleach and lavender air freshener. The receptionist handed me a clipboard with a thick stack of forms, half of which were already filled out. Rick stayed close, watching me as I scanned the pages. I noticed his handwriting on the section labeled Concerns. I didn't read it, but I didn't have to. I knew what it said. Forgetfulness, difficulty with mobility, suspected cognitive decline, all carefully worded lies with just enough truth to sound plausible. When the doctor called me in, Rick moved to follow, but I stopped him. "I'll go alone," I said, and for a moment something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Maybe even doubt. He sat back down without protest. The doctor was younger than I expected, early 40s, clean-shaven, the kind of man who called everyone sir, in a way that wasn't quite respectful. He asked me about the usual things, my memory, my balance, my medications. I answered everything clearly, deliberately, without stammering or delay. When he asked me to draw a clock, I drew it perfectly, even adding the little ticks between numbers. "Impressive," he muttered, almost disappointed. "You were in the military?" I nodded. "Vietnam." He asked more questions, subtle ones, the kind meant to trip you up. "What year is it? Who's the president? Count backward by sevens from 100. I did all of it without a hitch. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me like I'd just spoiled his plans. "You seem sharp, Mr. Hamlin," he said. "Nothing here suggests cognitive impairment." I returned to the waiting room with a straight spine and a calm face. Rick stood quickly. "How'd it go?" I looked him in the eye. He said, "I'm fine. Fit as an old fiddle." Rick's smile was tight, brittle. "Good, good. Just wanted to be sure." But his jaw flexed, and I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. They'd gambled and lost. Now they'd have to change tactics. Back at the house, things shifted again. I became invisible. No more breakfast calls, no more tray deliveries. I was allowed to make my own food now, left to scavenge for it, really. They knew I wouldn't complain. Complaining would be ammunition, proof that I was irritable, that I was uncooperative. I began to watch them as they had watched me. I listened through thin walls. I noted what papers were left out, what conversations stopped when I entered the room. I discovered that Jeremy had started meeting with a lawyer, a man named Collins. I heard the name during a phone call and wrote it down. I called an old friend of mine the next day, a retired attorney who owed me a favor, and asked him to look into it. Collins specialized in elder care litigation, guardianship filings, probate. I wasn't just being paranoid. They were preparing to erase me legally. The doctor had failed to do their job for them, so now they were moving on to Plan B. I knew I had to act. I couldn't just wait for them to file papers. If I let them get even an inch closer to legal control, it would all be over. I needed proof. I needed leverage. But more than anything, I needed to get out. That night, I made a decision. I packed a small bag with essentials, medications, my wallet, the old phone I kept hidden in the lining of my duffel bag, the unfinished cane, now polished just enough to serve. I waited until the house was asleep, crept through the hallway with careful, deliberate step, and slipped out the back door. I walked 2 blocks before I found a cab. The driver was young, tattooed, and suspicious of me until I showed him a $100 bill and told him where to go. "Downtown," I said. "Drop me at the intersection of 4th and Main." It was a long drive. I didn't speak. I just stared out the window as the streets grew wider and the houses older. I felt no fear, only clarity. It had been years since I felt that kind of adrenaline, not the panicked kind, but the purposeful, tactical kind. The feeling of movement, of taking back ground that had been lost inch by inch. I arrived at a building that looked like it hadn't been renovated since Reagan was in office. Inside was the office of Kenneth Dwyer, my old friend. He'd been my legal advisor decades ago when I bought my home, when Dorothy and I wrote our wills, when Jeremy got arrested for shoplifting in high school and needed a quiet fix. I trusted him because he never forgot who I was, even as others did. When he saw me, he stood, slowly, surprised, but not alarmed. "Jesus, Walter, you look like hell." I told him everything, from the broken cane to the doctor's appointment to the whispers behind closed doors. I showed him the copy of the property deed I'd managed to smuggle out from my house, which still had my name listed as sole owner. I handed him my notebook full of dates, times, overheard comments. His eyes grew darker as he read. "You've got enough here to at least stop them in their tracks," he said. "If they file for guardianship, we counter immediately, and if they've already stolen from you, we go criminal." I nodded. "I want to change my will," I said. "Remove both of them, entirely. Leave it all to charity or veterans, I don't care, just not them." He agreed. "And I want a restraining order. If they try to take me again, they don't get within 50 feet. Dwyer leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "You sure, Walter? This is war." I looked at him, calm as a lake before a storm. "It's already begun." By dawn, the papers were filed. By noon, I was checked into a small, privately owned extended stay hotel on the east side under a different name. Cash paid up front. I bought a new phone, new clothes, and contacted the local branch of my bank to change all account access. Rick and Jeremy would discover soon enough that the locks had changed, both literal and legal. I sat on the hotel bed that evening, cane resting against the wall, and for the first time in weeks felt the full breath of freedom in my lungs. Not just from their control, but from the years of appeasement, of quiet tolerance. The moment had come. I was no longer in hiding. I was rearming, recalibrating, reclaiming the territory of my life they thought they could annex. They had tried to strip me down to a shadow, but I had stepped back into the light. The morning after I re-established control over my accounts and identity, I awoke in my modest hotel room with the sensation that something permanent had shifted inside me. I felt it in my chest, in the steadiness of my pulse, in the quiet thrill of simply being awake in a space where no one could barge in, question my choices, or comment on my posture as I buttered a piece of toast. There was no sterile routine awaiting me, no Sandra with her pre-approved menu of vitamins and flavorless oatmeal. There was only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the satisfying weight of my cane resting against the nightstand, polished now, not to a gloss, but to the clean dignity of readiness. The wood was firm beneath my hand, a tangible reminder that I had clawed back a measure of authority over my own life. But this wasn't the end of it. This was only the moment I surfaced. Now, it was time to go deeper. Over the following days, I became methodical. I wasn't fueled by rage, not the kind that burns quickly and collapses on itself. What I felt was colder, clearer, sharpened by every word I had swallowed in silence over the years. It was the memory of my son's casual betrayals, their dismissive tones, their assumption that I could be handled, contained, erased. I had spent years trying to understand them, trying to love them, even when they offered me nothing but distance and paperwork. Now I stopped trying. I began keeping detailed notes. I wrote down dates, conversations, banking statements. I filed formal notifications through Dwyer's office, legally revoking all financial proxies and removing their access to anything tied to my estate. We sent certified letters to both Rick and Jeremy informing them of these changes. We knew they'd receive them within 48 hours. I didn't have to wait long for the response. Rick called first. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask where I was or if I was safe. His voice was tight, accusatory. "What the hell are you doing, Dad?" I listened to him breathe like a man trying to suppress panic. "You cut us off from everything. The bank account, the medical proxy. You had Sandra in tears. Do you know that?" I said nothing. I let the silence sit. Finally, I spoke. "I know what you and Jeremy were planning." He scoffed, but there was no conviction behind it. "We were trying to help you." I almost laughed. "Help me by declaring me incompetent? By stealing my documents and breaking my cane?" He hesitated. "You're not seeing this clearly, Dad. You're paranoid. You've been acting strange. Everyone's worried." I let the word paranoid hang in the air like smoke. Then I answered quietly, "You're the one who should be worried now." He hung up. The next day, Dwyer forwarded me a copy of the email their lawyer had sent, a clumsy attempt to question my mental state again. Attached were observational notes allegedly written by Sandra, full of exaggerations and outright lies. Walter often forgets names and places. He becomes angry and confused in the evening. He cannot manage his hygiene or medications without help. It was a transparent effort to establish a pattern of decline clearly intended for future use in court. But we had already preempted this. Dwyer arranged for me to undergo 3 independent evaluations from credentialed professionals, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and a geriatric specialist. Each report came back clean. Not just clean, commendatory. "Patient displays high cognitive resilience for his age," one doctor wrote. "Clear insight, excellent memory retention, no evidence of impairment." Dwyer packaged the reports neatly and filed them into my defense folder. If Rick and Jeremy wanted war, I was ready for trench warfare. And then came the house, my house, the one I had purchased 42 years ago with the GI Bill and Dorothy's part-time wages from the school cafeteria. The house where we raised our children, hosted birthdays, buried a dog in the backyard, and celebrated anniversaries. The house that, after my hip injury, Rick had suggested we put in trust, a process he handled, he said, to make things easier down the line. At the time, I had trusted him. I didn't read the fine print. I had assumed, foolishly, that blood still meant something. But Dwyer dug up the records and showed me the truth. Rick had manipulated the trust terms to give himself partial ownership upon transfer, with a clause that could allow him to sell or refinance under certain conditions. "He played you," Dwyer said bluntly. "But the good news is you still have legal standing as co-owner, and that gives us leverage." We filed to challenge the trust. Simultaneously, Dwyer contacted a realtor to appraise the home. If Rick wanted to leverage my property, he would now have to face the possibility of losing it entirely. I had no intention of moving back. That house was tainted. It no longer represented anything worth reclaiming. But I would not let them have it. Not after what they tried to do. Dwyer filed a motion for forced liquidation under joint ownership law. If the other party refused, we would pursue division of assets through the court. The message was clear. Either buy me out or watch the house get sold. By the time the legal wheels began turning, Jeremy made his move. He showed up at the hotel. I don't know how he found me. Maybe a friend at the bank tipped him off. Maybe he paid someone. All I know is that I opened the door one morning and found him standing there in a blazer, holding a Starbucks cup and a folder. He looked tired, thinner, angrier than I remembered. "Can we talk?" he said. I let him in, not out of grace, but curiosity. He didn't sit. He paced the room like a salesman on the edge of losing a deal. "Dad, this has gone too far. You're acting like we're enemies. We're your sons. You raised us. You taught us everything." I looked at him and saw the boy who once cried because I missed a baseball game. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man with paperwork and a price. "You tried to take my life from me," I said. He flinched, but recovered quickly. "We were trying to protect you. You weren't acting like yourself. You were forgetful, paranoid, angry." I held up the medical reports. "3 doctors disagree with you," he sneered. "Doctors don't know everything," I nodded, "and sons don't always deserve their fathers." He looked down, then pulled something from the folder. It was a proposal, a buyout offer, for my share of the house, half the market rate. "You're not getting the full value," he said. "No one will buy if we fight this in court. You'll lose money." I smiled. I'd rather lose money than lose myself." He left, slamming the door behind him. 3 days later, I received notice that they were contesting the evaluations, attempting to bring in their own expert. Dwyer laughed when he saw the name, an old colleague known for writing favorable assessments for anyone willing to pay. "Let them try," he said. "It won't hold up." Meanwhile, we accelerated the court filing. The judge granted a hearing within 2 weeks, expedited due to the evidence strain between the parties. In preparation, Dwyer subpoenaed phone records, surveillance footage from the clinic, and began interviewing former neighbors who had seen me perfectly capable before I vanished. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in my best suit. It was the one I had worn to Dorothy's funeral. I polished my shoes, combed my hair, and walked into the courtroom unaided, cane in hand, but never leaning on it. Rick and Jeremy sat with their lawyer, both in dark suits, trying to look composed. They didn't look at me. When the judge called our case, I stood straight and clear. Dwyer presented our documents, our evaluations, our evidence. Their lawyer attempted to question my mental fitness, but the judge interrupted. "Has the petitioner passed 3 independent evaluations?" Dwyer confirmed. "Then unless you have a court-ordered alternate opinion, we move forward." Their lawyer stammered. Rick stared at his lap. Jeremy clenched his fists. We had won this round. The hearing ended with the judge granting my motion to dissolve the trust and initiate the forced sale of the house. I would receive my share. Rick and Jeremy would be given 30 days to vacate or reach an agreement. When I walked out of the courthouse, I felt none of the gloating I expected, no joy, just air, fresh, unfiltered air in my lungs, for the first time in what felt like years. The war was not over, but I had taken the ground I needed. That night I sat alone in my room. I turned off the lights, opened the window, and let the evening breeze carry through the silence. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write in my notebook. I just sat, holding my cane across my knees, running my fingers over the grain. It was no longer just wood. It was history. It was identity. And now it was a witness to what had been lost and to what, at great cost, had been reclaimed. The day I returned to my house was not triumphant, not in the way stories usually portray victory. There was no music swelling in the background, no neighbors waving flags or dogs barking joyfully in the driveway. There was only a locksmith quietly changing the deadbolts while I stood behind him with my arms folded and the wind pressing against the back of my jacket. I had the court order in my breast pocket and the new deed with my lawyer's stamp tucked into a folder beneath my arm. The process of removing Rick and Jeremy from the property had been clinical. They didn't fight at the end. The judge's tone had been final. Their lawyer advised them to comply quickly to avoid contempt. By the time I arrived, they were already gone. Not a word, not a note, not a phone call. Just absence and silence, the kind I used to cherish and now regarded with something closer to suspicion. The house looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. It had been stripped of life. The furniture was in place, but nothing was where it used to be. The walls were clean, too clean, like they'd tried to erase something before leaving. My old chair was gone, probably discarded, and in its place was a beige recliner that looked like it had never been sat in. I moved slowly through each room, reacquainting myself with the corners and shadows, the places where time had folded into the walls. The photo of Dorothy was still on the mantel, though someone had moved it slightly off-center. I adjusted it back instinctively. My hand lingered on the frame for a moment longer than necessary. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but there was no room left for that kind of expression. The part of me that used to swell with emotion had been hardened, shaped into something else, something less romantic, more resolved. I was tired, but it was the clean fatigue of completion, the kind that comes not from collapse, but from enduring. I sat down at the kitchen table, now empty of their bland centerpieces and Sandra's artificial fruit bowls. I poured myself a glass of water and stared out the window. The lawn was dying. No one had watered it since I'd left. The hedges had grown shaggy and uneven. I'd fix that in time. Over the next week, I moved slowly, rebuilding the space to resemble something I could live in again. I sold the recliner. I bought a new coffee pot. I replaced the curtain in the bathroom that Sandra had insisted was more modern. I tore it down with a strange satisfaction, like peeling away a bandage that had outlived its wound. I brought in a rescue dog from the shelter, a quiet mutt with soft eyes and a limp in his right leg. I named him Amos. We understood each other right away. We both walked slow, we both liked silence, and we both had been abandoned by people who once promised love. Rick tried to call a few times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails full of phrases like, "This has gone too far," and "We need to find common ground." He even used the word healing. I deleted each message without listening past the first few seconds. Jeremy sent an email, short, cold. "Hope you're satisfied. You got what you wanted." He didn't sign it. I didn't reply. They had made their decisions. They had chosen power over relationship, entitlement over respect. They had broken something in me that no apology could fix. One afternoon, about 10 days after I'd moved back in, I found myself in the garage. I hadn't intended to go in there. I'd opened the door to find a screwdriver and ended up standing in the center of the space, surrounded by shadows of my former life. The workbench was still there, though someone had moved all the tools. My old fishing rod was snapped in two, tossed in a corner. My boots were gone. But in the far corner, underneath a stack of broken picture frames and rusted paint cans, I found what I hadn't realized I was looking for. The cane. The original one. The one they had snapped and thrown away. They hadn't bothered to take it with them. They hadn't even truly thrown it out. They had just hidden it, buried it, like evidence. I picked it up. It was cracked near the base, the shaft splintered and rough, but it still held its shape. It still resembled itself, even in its wounded state. I ran my hand along the grain, felt the break with my thumb, and then I leaned it against the wall next to its replacement. 2 canes, one broken, one whole. I stood there for a long time, staring at both, thinking about the man I used to be, the man I had to become, to survive this, and the man I would choose to be now. I went into the house and sat at the kitchen table. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote just one sentence on the first page. "I am not what they tried to make me." Then I closed it. That was enough. No memoirs, no confessions. Just the act of writing it down was enough to make it true. That night I took a walk around the neighborhood, slow, steady, cane in hand, Amos at my side. Some neighbors waved, others looked away, embarrassed maybe. They had seen the ambulance that night I fell. They had seen my sons pack up the car and drive me away, but no one had knocked. No one had asked. That was fine. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply aware of how easy it is to disappear when people decide you're no longer necessary. But I was necessary, if only to myself, if only to prove that I still existed beyond the frame they had tried to hang me in. They had reduced me to a figure in the background of their lives, a relic, a responsibility. But I had stepped forward again, claimed space, reclaimed breath. And now I could walk down my street not as a burden, but as a man whose steps still made sound. As I turned the corner back toward the house, the porch light clicked on automatically, casting a warm circle across the front steps. Amos stopped and sniffed the air. I looked up at the stars, felt the cool press of night against my face, and let the silence settle around me. I was alone, but I was free. And that, at this stage of life, is a kind of love I hadn't known I was still allowed to feel. The seasons shifted slowly after that, as if time itself had decided to match the rhythm of my new life. I watched the grass turn from brittle brown to a pale, tentative green. The hedges revived themselves under my care, and the dog began to trust that I wasn't going to leave him behind. I built days out of small rituals, coffee at sunrise, slow walks with Amos, sharpening my tools even if I didn't use them. I read books I had meant to finish years ago. I cooked for myself. I even wrote letters, not to Rick or Jeremy, but to people long gone, Dorothy, old Army friends. Some were alive, some weren't. But I wrote them anyway, not to send, just to speak into the silence. There was no grand reconciliation, no late-night knock at the door, no teary-eyed embrace. That kind of closure lives in movies, not real life. Real life gives you something quieter, something smaller but more honest, like the sound of your own breath when you wake up and realize there's no one trying to monitor it, like the taste of coffee you brewed exactly how you like it, without anyone telling you it's too strong, too bitter, too much, like the space around you finally belonging to you again, down to the last square inch. That was the real ending. Or maybe not an ending, just a new sentence beginning after the ellipsis. Rick never called again. Jeremy sent one final email, more insult than apology, accusing me of selfishness, of betrayal. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They had already made it clear who they were, not children anymore, not sons, not really. Just men I happened to raise who had grown into people I didn't recognize. People who believed that love could be measured in terms of access, managed like an estate. People who confused care with control, who thought the cane was a symbol of weakness, never realizing it was a weapon, a compass, a line they were never meant to cross. Sometimes I walk past families on the sidewalk, fathers and grown sons, laughing, arguing, jostling each other like puppies. And I wonder if I ever had that. I think I did. Once. Before time took its toll, before ambition twisted things, before I became an inconvenience in their story instead of the author of their origin. I don't resent the world for changing. I resent the people who pretended they hadn't, who smiled while repositioning you behind glass like an exhibit labeled Dad, 1943, too. I updated my will, left the house and all remaining assets to a veterans scholarship fund. Dwyer handled the paperwork, asked if I wanted to include any last provisions for the boys. I told him no. Let them make their own way, as I had. Let them learn what I had to learn the hard way, that life is not an inheritance, it is a responsibility, that love without respect is just another form of theft, that one day, if they're lucky, they'll live long enough to know what it feels like to be underestimated by people who once called you Dad, like it meant something. I keep the broken cane in the corner of the living room, not displayed, not polished, just there, standing quietly, next to the one I use now. Sometimes I look at it when I'm pouring coffee or feeding the dog. It reminds me of everything, of how far I let them push me, of how far I had to go to stand up again, of the night I found my name buried under paperwork and pulled it back with nothing but a pen and a lawyer who still remembered who I used to be. It reminds me that the body may weaken, but the will, that remains, if you tend to it like a flame in wind. I don't know how much longer I have. That thought used to fill me with dread. Now it doesn't. I've reclaimed my ending. Not the details of it, but the ownership. I will not die with my story told by someone else. I've told it myself. I've lived it with pain, with silence, with fury, with clarity, and now with peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from remembering everything, and surviving anyway. So yes, they threw my cane in the trash. They thought they'd broken me. But what they really did was carve away the final illusions I had about who they were, and what they gave me, in their cruelty, was freedom. I picked up what they discarded. I shaped it anew. I used it not just to stand, but to strike. Not with violence, but with truth. And in doing so, I knocked them out of my life, not out of vengeance, but because I finally understood that love must be earned. And dignity must be defended even when your hands shake and your knees protest, even then, especially then.